Hello, I welcome everybody who has joined us today. This is the Media Center Ukraine in Ukrinform, which is going on with its work. This is 183rd day of the full-scale invasion of Russian aggressor, and today we will be speaking about the very important topic, the topic of recovery and deoccupation of Crimea, the economic model. And I would like to introduce today's speakers. That is Tamila Tasheva, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, Alina Frolova, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine in 2019-2020 and also Deputy Chair of the Board of the Center for Defense Strategies, Oleksandra Azarkhina, Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, and Maxim Fedosenko, Kyiv School of Economics representative. On the 23rd of August, everybody has seen that we had the second summit of the Crimean platform, and at this summit, the President of Ukraine has presented the strategy for recovery and restoration of Crimea. So, Tamila, could you please tell a bit about this strategy, what it includes, and why do we need it? Okay, thank you so much. Hello, dear colleagues. We thank you that you've come here and that you are paying attention to the topic of the Crimea. I will not tell about the full strategy, but I will tell you maybe some of the preconditions why this document emerged. We were working on this project and document together with the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine, the Center of Defense Strategies and Kyiv School of Economics, involving also other state and public actors and expert community, and the office of the President of Ukraine. This used to be the task and the decree of the President, because we understand that deoccupation of the Crimea sooner or later will take place. Of course, we're working on it to take place much quicker, much sooner. And for us, it is so important to send the signals not only for our international partners and to show that we are now thinking on how the Crimea will look like after the occupation of the Crimean Peninsula, but first and foremost the signals to our citizens of Ukraine which are residing at the temporarily occupied territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol city. So this plan of recovery, economic recovery of the Crimea, will be embedded into the overall plan of the recovery of Ukrainian state. Yes, really, on the 23rd of August, at the second online summit of the Crimean platform, the President of Ukraine has already presented this plan. He told about the importance of this plan, and the more detailed information of the fourth part of the online summit of the Crimean platform was presented by the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Today, we will be speaking about that in more details about this plan, including the sphere of tourism, what we are doing about infrastructure, and how we will restore and recover Crimea, and how it is correlated with the security issues, humanitarian policy issues, and so on. So altogether, last year, 2021, we have presented the strategy of deoccupation and reintegration. Well, of course, a certain economic bloc was present there as well, and this strategy is also has been developed taking into account the overall context of the full-scale war, the overall context of all the 8 years of occupation, and also it took into account the strategy of deoccupation, and it based upon its principles. It's very important to mention that in this document you will not see detailization about the legal definition, how and in which format the Autonomous Republic Crimea will exist, because now within a different working group we are developing the legal framework of the state understanding of the whole Crimean Peninsula. We all understand that the Crimea is the part of the Ukrainian state, but whether it will be just a region or maybe it will be the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, well, with some of the separate status as it used to have of Sevastopol city, we will define it later. Our position is that Sevastopol city had a special status Just considering the Russian narrative which they promoted of their existence, of the Russian fleet, their Russian navy on the territory of Sevastopol city. So all of that will be reconsidered. We did not write any details in the plan, anything about the rights and citizenship and how we will perceive the citizens of Russian Federation, who, I remind you, came to the territory of the peninsula and are staying there illegally. 500 to 800,000. Some of the experts tell that this is the approximate number. You will not see so far in this document any issues of the ownership rights for real estate, including the issues of nationalization of the property, which was done by the aggressor country, or the issues of responsibility and liability for the harm and losses on the territory of the peninsula, including the issues of amnesty, lustration, or staff reserve. But all of those are the issues which are definitely connected with the issues of economic recovery of Crimea. So that is why this work is just the first concept. This is the first framework of our vision. Further on, later on, as for the measures and events which will be taking place in Berlin at the level of the European countries, we will present the more detailed plan of economic recovery, which will be, I will repeat, embedded into the overall policy of the state about the economic recovery of the whole state. So the part about the Crimea will be there as well. And of course, we will present this strategy or the plan of economic recovery at the parliamentary summit of the Crimean platform, which will take place in the end of October in Zagreb, in Croatia. It will be the first parliamentary summit where as well, we'll have the expert level represented there, and in the panel, which will be devoted to the issues of reintegration and recovery of the Crimean Peninsula after the occupation, will be presented there as well. So I think that's it from me so far. I would like to express my gratitude and say that we would ask you to follow what will take place during the future months, the next months of the work, beginning with the autumn. We will dwell in more details about some of the parts of this strategy, because the Crimea used to be, is, and definitely will be the part of Ukraine. And definitely the war did not start on the 24th of February. We'd like to emphasize the war started with the occupation of the Crimea, so the security of the whole region will be provided only after deoccupation of all of our territories, including the Crimean Peninsula. And the war and the victory for us means the comeback of all of the territories. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would like to remind you that we have the printed version of this strategy, so when our event is over, each of you will be able to get acquainted with it. We have it in English as well. And now I'm giving the floor about the humanitarian component of the strategy, the component which really worries us a lot, most of all. Yes, that's true. The occupation of the Crimea gave an opportunity for the Russia to move on, and this weak response of the world community onto what has taken place gave it an opportunity to move on. So the Crimea during this year has become a military base, which was not only used to conduct strikes against Ukraine, but also to violate calm and quiet situation in lots of regions of the world, including Syria, because the Crimea was used as the platform for the troops, for the Russian troops which were moving to Syria, and also for the blockage of the Azov Sea, just to block the proper movement of the commercial transport in the Black Sea. And also Russia used the gas wells, which were used like mini military bases, which gave them the opportunity to control the entrance to the Ukrainian ports and to restrict them. It created threats to the riverbed of the Danube. So we have described all of those threats and told how it can take place later. Unfortunately, this is what really took place. The full blockage of the Black Sea leads to the potential grain crisis. We have the decline of lots of businesses and enterprises, the companies which were working on the delivery of freights, let alone all the rest. So when you ask about whether the Crimea can be demilitarized, whether it should be demilitarized after its liberation, I can tell you definitely the 100% of the experts and public activists consider that it is impossible, because the Crimea is strategically a very useful platform for the control of the security situation in the Black Sea. I will remind you that there are missiles there which can, for instance, reach any capital in Europe. And according to the assessment of the experts, they can also have tactical nuclear weapons there. There are some of the signs witnessing about that. This is the awful danger, not only for Europe, but for lots of the countries. The presence of Russia and militarization of the Crimea is felt in the Mediterranean area, the Baltic Sea and Caspian Sea, which is fully under control of Russia. So demilitarization of the Crimea by Ukraine is impossible. The Crimea should locate the armed forces of Ukraine, the navy of Ukraine. But when we have been working on this concept and we have communicated with the experts, Ukraine in no way would like to have the Crimea as the military base. We wouldn't. We would like Crimea to look as an example of the friendly militarization, when we have some coexistence of the civilian life and military life, when the military component will definitely impact the economic development of the Crimea. We need to understand that first, it will be very substantial for the development of the Crimea, because the economy of the Crimea is suffering, and we will speak about that later. So the military objects maintenance and all of the services which are created to support the work of the military objects will be the substantial part of the economic recovery, a kind of the economic booster. So, in fact, first and foremost, the Crimea should be the guarantee of security not only of Ukraine. We are covering Romania. We provide the opportunity of the transportation to Georgia. We will provide the proper transportation of any commercial freights through the Black Sea. And we will be able to provide guarantees that the peninsula won't be used in any military aggressive actions. First. Secondly, what is about the location of the potential location of the tactical nuclear weapon, why we think that it could take place? Because Crimea restored the infrastructure which should support the functioning of this kind of weapons. They even created the special unit which in the Russian army, which should deal with the maintenance of such military objects on the territory of the Crimea. Of course, it's incredibly dangerous. Ukraine has joined the treaty about proliferation, so we need to bring the Crimea back to the territory which is free of tactical nuclear weapons. And then it will mean that all of the objects which were restored to use such kind of weapons should be transferred into a different mode or just preserved and used in a different way. Thirdly, the Crimea should become a guarantor of the regional security and Ukrainian security, because the Crimea is also covering the continental part of Ukraine, and it provides its security and safety. And the most important thing, it will give us an opportunity to deblock the Azov Sea and to make the Azov Sea under the regulation of the international law, which is not true now, because Russia considers it to be its internal sea and does not give an opportunity to anybody to use this resource. What's also important about the Black Sea has lots of gas, and my colleagues will tell about that as well. And also, the extraction of gas is possible only when we have the secure infrastructure and the protection by the Ukrainian military of this extraction as well. The same extraction can be done by Romania. Now they cannot develop this project because of the events which are connected with the war of Russia against Ukraine. And also the servicemen, the military, should clean the sea from the mines. As of now, we get lots of notifications about the mining of the whole Black Sea, including the parts which are very close to the riverbed of the Danube. And recently you could see that these mines are just swept to the beaches in other states. So those are the tasks of the servicemen of the military, to conduct this procedure and to clean the sea from those dangerous components. And of course, we would like the Crimea to be open for the international community, for the NATO and the EU, including our military cooperation and the Black Sea. Well, the lack of attention of NATO to the Black Sea showed that this was a mistake strategy, because the Black Sea is now one of the biggest threats for the security of NATO countries. That is why we will be really happy to welcome our partners of NATO, and not only NATO, anybody. In fact, we can see that it will give us the inflow of tourists, because the military component, if it is friendly, if it rather visual, and lots of tourists will go there just to see the military parades or friendly militarization, including the coming of the foreign military ships will always incentivize the tourist flow. So we would like to see the multinational presence and the visits by other countries, the cooperation in the military sphere. So in fact, that's it about the economic model. How militarization will impact the economic model. We can see some driver in that. We can see some inflow of tourists in that. And we would like to have a very friendly cooperation and relations between the military infrastructure and the civil one. Oleksandra, let us speak about the infrastructural projects which are planned for the implementation in the deoccupied Crimea, please. Hello, I'm Oleksandra Azarkhina. In fact, during the peaceful times, the infrastructure is the equation for comfort and mobility of the population, the goods, and finally for the richness of the nation. Under the military conditions, the infrastructure is also becoming the issue of defense capacity, how quickly we can move people, the army, all of the necessary points necessary for the provision of the front line and the rear. The defense capacity depends on that. When we speak about the infrastructure projects after the end of the war, after our victory, and when the Crimea will come back to the Ukrainian authorities, we are speaking about the two tasks of the infrastructure. First is reintegration of the peninsula with all of the rest regions of the country. Secondly is reintegration of the Crimea with the whole world, both the western axis, we are speaking about the EU first of all, and in the southern direction, because when we look on the map, we definitely forget that the Crimea is the point which is not just the guarantor of security in this region, but it's also a certain southern gate for Ukraine, which witnesses about its opportunity to perform the function of the hub, the function of a very important transport unit for all of the types of transport and communication, not only with our western but also southern partners. Especially it's relevant when we are speaking about the world food crisis and the role which Ukraine is playing in this point. So when we are speaking how we created all of those projects, really, they are compliant with all those tasks. Unfortunately, maybe you remember the statistical data which showed the inhabitants of the peninsula which had to support Russian occupiers because of some of the reasons. Lots of them have never seen any other regions of the country, let alone their opportunity to see Europe or the world. They never traveled. So that's what shaped their understanding. So first of all, what we need to do in the infrastructure thing is to open the windows and the doors and to let the fresh air in. for the peninsula to breathe with fresh air. Practically, we are speaking about such projects which will need attention both at the level of the road connection and the railway connection, and what's important, the sea passenger, the marine passenger transport. 2 years ago, according to the initiative of the president, almost 3 years ago, in fact, Ukraine has started a very big infrastructure reform which foresaw a huge restoration of kilometers of the roads. Lots of people criticized that, but it also performed an important function which witnesses about the opportunity to connect our regions and oblasts with each other. Years by years, Chernivtsi and Kropivnitsky parts were just islands, and the same happened with the peninsula. The roads and the railway connection is in our focus. Interesting statistics about deoccupation. The structure of the passenger flow was following: 67% were the railway transport, 20% automobile, 13% aviation. In 2020, 70% is the automobile, 25% is aircrafts, and the rest is railway. So it's not only about the disbalance, but also about the environmental issues. We can see that it's the less ecological. So during the occupation years, they brought lots of cars of low ecological and environmental standards. So Ukraine has to get rid of them. We are looking at the opportunity for the development of the sector for the electro cars, because it's also compliant with the requirements for the environmental protection, and it also is really compliant with the climate conditions. And now we also consider that during these years of occupation, those are just lost opportunities for the Crimean residents. We will need to catch up, including the reforms which have been conducted by Ukraine thanks to the signing of the association agreement. The things which are usual for us, like digitalization, like decentralization, like our rights and freedoms, unfortunately, were just lost for the Crimea. And here we have such an example. For instance, road connection and integration into the European network of roads. Every year we had a very technical piece of work when we said that the routes of Ukraine should become the part of European routes. Nothing new and nothing incredible in that. We are just, taking the ruler and putting it on the map. But it is about the visibility for the Europeans of us as a country, and for them to see that our country is not just the white spot, but the opportunity for the development of travels, and it's very close in all of the possible senses. Then, from the infrastructural part of view, the Crimea should be fully integrated, first of all, with the southern oblasts or regions, and unfortunately some of the roads, even before occupation, did not exist. And this is a very important axis which connects our south with all of the rest regions, like M17, Kherson, Jankoy, Feodosia, Kerch, M18, Kharkiv, Melitopol, Simferopol, Alushta, Yalta, and M14, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Melitopol, important roads. And especially the roads are playing not only the issue of convenience, but also defense capacity. The same concerns the passenger railway connection. We understand that the priority routes are still Kyiv, Sevastopol, Kharkiv, Kherson, Simferopol, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Kerch. And what's interesting about that is the opportunity, how the infrastructure can create certain opportunities for the economy. When we thought about the fate of the industry, and Kyiv School of Economy will tell about that later, we were posing the question, which type of industry can stay there, which will be needed, and so on. For instance, I was speaking about the electrical vehicles. Secondly, the heavy industries like shipbuilding. If Russia needs military ships, we are interested to have passenger transport, because the Aquatoria is closed now. And as it was mentioned, this is not only the issue for Ukraine, but for all of the countries which have exit to the Black Sea. This is the environmentally clean type of transport, and it does not develop. Before the occupation, there were projects in our ministry to launch huge passenger cruise liners to the Crimea. This should be the project which we should come back to. And the next issue that we need to be compliant with the standards of Green Deal, and this should take place in the Crimea. The same about the transport, because the transport is one of the biggest polluters of the environment. But if we create this model properly, in an appropriate manner, we will have the sustainable development of the Crimea. The port infrastructure, we need to reintegrate 5 Crimean ports, Yevpatoria, Kerch, Feodosia, Yalta, Sevastopol, into the unified transport system of Ukraine and freight system. We saw how the blockage of the Ukrainian ports impact the whole Ukrainian economy and the world economy, including the food situation on lots of the continents. And we also see interesting researches and sometimes unexpected results that without the Ukrainian agrarian products and normal volumes of it, we saw not only the most vulnerable countries affected, I mean African continent, but also our neighboring countries, the EU countries, which never noticed the role of the sunflower oil on their market. And all of that impacted the inflation in the world. So when we are saying that during the first years after the occupation, we plan the recovery of the freights on the level of more than 30 million tons a year, those are totally real figures, including the situation that the Ukrainian agrarian sector is developing in spite of any military threats. And there is high demand on that. Then we are looking about aviation hub, which should be very powerful. Alina mentioned an interesting point, how the existence of Crimea as a closed military base impacts our neighbors, blocking the projects on gas extraction, blocking the transportation. In case of aviation, this is also the issue of big money, because when we close airspace over the peninsula, Ukraine is not the only one to lose. Thousands of aviation carriers are losing because they cannot use this space for their transportation. Ukraine, of course, loses money because the transit potential is what we get, in fact, just like it is from those who use our airspace. So all of those details lead to the normal opportunity of the integration of the whole country into the world space. Because from the transport point of view, we are in the dead end. The airspace is blocked because of the security issues. The railway connection is blocked because we have such a neighbor. And it turns out that we are on the edge of civilization, and we need to reconstruct it to see the whole map and our place as the connection with the West and the South as well. So one of the biggest and most interesting projects of infrastructure for us, which we have been actively discussing in the team, is about the secure disassembling. I mean the necessity of the transport modal balancing and reintegration of all of the transport flows into other regions of Ukraine, but it's also connected with the use of the Azov Sea as the equatorium, not like just internal sea, with some environmental challenges, flora and fauna, which were affected because of the construction of this bridge. So this bridge does not have the right for existence. And also I'd like to speak about the new tourism policy. In the structure of our ministry, we have the State Agency on the Development of Tourism, so we understand that all of those points are directly connected with how we will develop tourism in the Crimea. A bit of statistical data. Before the occupation, 63% of the tourists on the peninsula were the citizens of Ukraine. The bigger part of the rest were the Russians. Now it's upside down. 85 to 90% are the citizens of Russia, then citizens of the so-called Eurasian Union, and because of the full closure of the peninsula in all of the senses of the world does not see the Crimea, and the Crimea does not see anyone from the world. So there is an important point for us. Reintegration point. That is, all of the European reforms which we are conducting, to some extent, they are bringing us back to the usual daily things. The availability of the Ukrainian foreign passport, the biometric passport, is the ticket for those residents of the Crimea who have the citizenship of Ukraine and who will be able to see the whole world. But those are just exceptions, and we need to restore it for 100% to make it fair, just, and open, and then we will be able to work on the proportion, on the ratio for this this tourism flow to come back to at least 60% to be the citizens of Ukraine, which are having relaxation and rest there, and at least 30% are from the EU countries, the US or other friendly countries, which will be able to rediscover the peninsula for themselves, because it has traditionally been developed as a beach tourism, and unfortunately now it's only strengthened because the Russian tourism policy was basing upon the dotation approach, which gave the opportunity to support the branch itself and gave some investments into the GDP, because this is the part of the money which is invested into the peninsula. But this is not the system which would support small and medium businesses, the residents of the Crimea, which would support, which would gain some of the outcomes of the tourism branch, which is the most developed on the peninsula. So of course we are speaking about the tourism not only as a project which will provide accessibility, but also the project which will discover its potential, not only as a big beach, but also the project of Crimea 365. That is the necessity of using the Crimea as a tourist destination all the year round. So we need to work with the bigger world brands on that. Together with the team, with Tamila, we will pay attention to that, and we will explain why the Crimea after occupation will need partners, because it has got lots of opportunities for the development of the multinational business, which would be interesting as well. But simultaneously we understand that we would like to support SMEs. We would like to base upon the traditional craft, and we would like the entrepreneurs of the Crimea to see that it is possible to develop not only their own beds to stay at, because if you had some rest there, you remember those signs, free beds. This is definitely not the type of tourism we would like to develop. We would like them to develop, to grow, I don't know, to create mugs, to create jugs, and just to show the diversity of the culture, which would show interesting and deeper stories of the peninsula. So we are looking at the recovery and restoration of the cult festivals. Kazantip, Koktebel, years of occupation showed that it's not enough to show the physical destination of the festivals. This is the philosophy and the spirit of the peninsula, who everybody felt if you visited those festivals. We need to bring it back. Together with the Office of the First Lady, we are working on the project of rehabilitation for the servicemen, for the military. We would like our sanatorium and resort foundation to be compliant with the requirements for medical rehabilitation of our ex-combatants and veterans, and psychological rehabilitation of the victims of war, because we understand that the Crimea has lots of opportunities for the development of this sector, and it will be a huge push for the medical tourism as well. Besides that, we are working on the creation of the University of Hospitality and Tourism, encouragement of the cooperation in the tourism sector with other spheres, and like formation of the development of culture and sabbatical. And here I need to conclude, because we can see that this is kind of the leadership should be of the indigenous people who are living there, and together with the international and foreign community. Because of the tragic events, the attention to Ukraine is very high, and if this attention used to be as close as it's now for 8 years, we would be able to avoid lots of problems. So we need to draw attention to this issue again for the Crimea to become interesting and worthy tourism object for the development and investments for all of our partners. Thank you so much. I give the floor to our colleagues from Kyiv School of Economics. Maxim, let us speak about the components of the strategy connected with the industry, its development, and the energy independence of the peninsula. Okay, thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to say that the economically strong Crimea is the strong Crimea on the resistance against aggressors. So it's important to create strong economy on the peninsula. We understand that the aim of the temporary occupation of Crimea was not the development of economy or entrepreneurship, but militarization of the peninsula. So we can see the consequences of the negative impact onto the economy of the Crimea, that is, the decrease of the private sector with the increase of the public sector, the decrease of the SMEs, more than 20 times decrease of international trade of the Crimea after the occupation. And also we see that in fact there have been violations of all of the economic connections of the Crimea with Ukraine and the modern world. The Crimea was economically reoriented and was created in the strong connection with Russia to satisfy its needs. We need to restore and recover Crimea and to reintegrate it into the economic space of the country, into the world economic space, the global value creation links, and also to add international actors and modern technologies which are not in the Crimea today. They need to be working and involved in the recovery of the Crimea. We need to work together on that. First of all, to use it and to get the quick outcomes for each invested hryvnia or for each invested dollar or euro. For us to get more feedback or result, we need to focus on the recovery factors which are unique for the Crimea. Those are competitive advantages of the peninsula. We have mentioned lots of them already. The geographic location, which is an advantage, the logistic ways, the natural conditions for the development of the tourism, and also mineral resources, the energy service. So the Crimea is unique about that. As for the development of the energy sphere, the Crimea has all the opportunities to become the energy center of the region on the carbon extraction. There are lots of potentials to extract natural gas in the Black Sea on the territory of the Crimea. The potential fields are 2.3 trillions of cubic meters of natural gas. Those are substantial figures. Even the existing fields are approximately 60 billion cubic meters. Before the war, Ukraine consumed 30 billion cubic meters of gas, 20 of which were of our own extraction and 10 were imported. So thanks to these reserves, we can not only satisfy our internal consumption, but to provide the energy security of our partners, the EU and neighboring countries. So it is so important as an development component. So we need to extract natural gas with the modern technologies, with the minimum impact onto the environment. For that, we need to involve international partners looking at those deposits. When we are speaking about the economic development, it should take place with the help of the development of the SMEs, small and medium enterprises, which will not only increase GDP, but it will also increase the welfare of the population and the revenue of the whole population of the Crimea. It will positively impact each resident of the Crimea. That is why we need to have such a balance between the development of SMEs and the involvement of the international partners and the bigger corporations, for the bigger partners not to replace potential job places for the small and medium entrepreneurship, and vice versa, to be a catalyst for the development of economy. And thanks to them, there should be bigger, substantial projects developed. We should involve modern technologies, for instance, in the energy sector, or in the tourism, or in the construction of the modern ships. That is why the development of the natural gas extraction should be done with the leading world players at this market. In the energy sector, we need to develop the renewables, because Crimea has a huge potential for that. That is both solar energy and wind energy. And a big part of the energy balance of the Crimea and Ukraine should be taken by the renewables. Altogether, the integration of the Crimea as part of Ukraine into the European system of energy, and so will provide a special incentive for the development of the renewables and to involve additional investments into this sector. The energy sector should have also the implemented projects connected with the thermomodernization and the increase of the efficiency of the use of energy resources. And also, as it was mentioned by Oleksandra, that is the development of electrical vehicles and the infrastructure for them, the creation of the market of these services, and the market of electric cars in the Crimea. As for the development of SMEs, the Crimea has to develop the spheres which are, first of all, historical for it, and which will have a synergy effect, together with the development of tourism, the development of infrastructure. For instance, for the development of tourism, it would be nice to develop the production and manufacturing of craft things, and the agriculture and the animal farming, which is historical for this area. And also we shouldn't forget about the development of the historical industry spheres like shipbuilding. And here we also will have the synergy effect after the recovery of the Black Sea Navy and the implementation of the projects of the shipbuilding for the military, which we should create together with our partners, for instance, the UK and Turkey. Altogether, we need to pay separate attention to the heavy industry, which now exists in the Crimea. Those are such enterprises like soda factory, Titan factory, which are negatively impacting the environment and are just the legacy of the Soviet times looking at their technologies. So the Crimea should have heavy industry which is updated according to the modern environmental and climate standards. If it does not take place, the enterprises should be just refocused onto a different type of activities or closed, with the liquidating of the consequences which are the negative ones for the environment. That is, recultivation of the waste disposals, industry ones, the recultivated of the polluted lands. A separate part in the recovery is ecology. Here, the Crimea, together with Ukraine and integration of the country into the European space, should comply with all the modern ecological and climate requirements. The Crimea should become the environmentally clean region of Ukraine and the climate-neutral peninsula to minimize the impact onto the global warming and to decrease the greenhouse effect, which will take place with the changes in the energy and industry sector. This is how we can mitigate and minimize the impact onto the environment. In the ecology, we need to expand the zones which are protected by the state, because since the militarization took place and since the combats took place, lots of territories were polluted, and there was a negative impact of war, which is felt in the ecology as well. I thank you, Maxim. So the comment, after the comment from Tamila, we will go to the Q&A session. We will start it. Yes, dear colleagues, thank you so much. I would also add several words about the humanitarian component and the importance of the recovery of such a mosaic of different, diverse cultures on the territory of the Crimea, of course, especially with an emphasis on the rights of the indigenous people. I will remind you that according to the Ukrainian legislation, the indigenous people of Ukraine are Crims, Krimchaks, and Crimean Tatars. But what's important, the Crimea has always been multicultural, multinational, but during these 8 years we can see how the cultures are prosecuted, the cultures of other nations and peoples which have we can hear that from one voice from Russia, when the whole cultural informational space is totally polluted and messed up by Russian narratives, when they pay attention just to religious and cultural peculiarities of the certain people. So for us it is so important for this diversity and a special focus on the indigenous people to be restored and recovered. So we will be working on that as well. And of course it is connected with different spheres and branches of the economy on the territory of the peninsula, in particular with the tourist sphere. For instance, when Oleksandra was speaking about the development and support of tourism, for us to have huge companies working there and hotel complexes created, of course we would ask our international partners who will implement those projects, we would ask them to emphasize onto the ethnical cultural component. For instance, well, just formally speaking, as an example, to create Hilton Hotel, but in the Crimean Tatar style, taking into account the whole context, the cultural context, and narratives which are natural for the Crimea. Besides that, it's so important to mention that we will definitely support the comeback of the higher educational institutions to the Crimea, I mean Ukrainian ones, and opening of the newer higher educational institutions, taking into account the cultural and humanitarian importance of these issues. Besides that, we would like to create, and I think that soon we will begin the communication with the stakeholders, the Institute of the Research of the Consequences of Temporary Occupation and Mechanisms of Reintegration. And what's important, it's important to do it on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula, where we have 3 indigenous people, to create the Museum of the Crimean Tatar people and the Laboratory of the Research of Indigenous Peoples, not only of Ukraine but of the world, because we can share the experience which we gained during the whole period of independence, especially during the several last years when we were developing the culture, the language, and so on of the indigenous people of Ukraine. Of course, we will be speaking and we will restore the network of the Ukrainian educational institutions all over the Crimean Peninsula, because as of 2014, Ukrainian schools and Crimean Tatar schools with these languages of training were not enough, were not substantial. But after 2014, after the beginning of the temporary occupation, they just vanished. So their number decreased, and let alone the real state of affairs when the school is named as if it has the Crimean Tatar language of tuition, but they don't have this language there at all. Besides that, it's so important to mention that we need to conduct memorialization of the cultural and historical events on the territory of the peninsula. I will not delve deeper into all of the projects about the cultural and humanitarian component, but definitely they will be the foundation, the basics, to restore all the economic spheres in the restored Crimean Peninsula. Thank you, Tamila. Are there any questions, dear colleagues? Please take the mic. Hello, Maria Honcharuk, Ukrinform. My question is to Ms. Tasheva. How long can the reintegration of the Crimea can take after the occupation? That's the hard question, considering that we don't know how, in which way we will bring back the control over the Crimean Peninsula. There are different scenarios, you need to understand that. If it is the military scenario, if we actively use the military components, first of all, if the Russian Federation, for instance, fully destroys the infrastructure when they withdraw from the territory of the Crimea, is one story. So we'll need to recover what we see on the territory of the whole state when the civil infrastructure is destroyed, and then we will need to restore it and to recover it on the territory of the Crimea as well. Because unfortunately we understand that the Russian Federation does not want to leave the Crimean territory peacefully. So it will be one story. Another, a different type of story, is when we have peaceful deoccupation in the diplomatic way. So with the use of some, well, of course, military components, because we cannot forget about that. This is a different type of a story, but we understand that there is lots of work ahead of us. In my introduction speech, I mentioned the responsibility, because thousands, hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens are living on the territory of the peninsula. Of course, they are not that willing to leave the territory, though we can see how they are living during several last weeks. But still, they will oppose. So how should we treat the citizens of Russian Federation who already were born on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula? This legislative framework should be developed now. We are doing that, and we understand that those are hard questions. The issues of the staff reserve and the potential of the replacement with the Ukrainian personnel and staff for all of the staff on the territory of Peninsula. Those are thousands of job places, law enforcement authorities, military, the issues of education, culture, humanitarian component, informational component, and so on. So definitely it will take a very long and time. This will be the process we are getting ready to. Unfortunately, we cannot afford ourselves to say that we will wait when we gain the control back, and then we will create the plans and mechanisms and ways to restore the territory. That is why last year we adopted the strategy of deoccupation, the plan of its implementation. This is the framework document, but it is working as well. And just now we are showing the Ukrainian citizens on the territory of the peninsula this economic model of the recovery, what is awaiting for our citizens, where they can work, what's the potential they can have for them to grasp this idea and to help us, including the Ukrainian army, and not to be against deoccupation and reintegration of the territory. Even now we have created this working group together with Alina, including, and other experts, organizations, and the state and public authorities. We are working on the legal provision of the reintegration process, including the liability and amnesty and lustration. I will instantly say that the people who violated the human rights, who committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, they will not get under amnesty. All the rest can be under amnesty. And also the issues of lustration, because those are thousands of people who are taking places in the occupational administrations. Definitely they will get through the lustration measures, and they won't have the right to take the positions, official positions on the territory of the peninsula, and we will think how long will it take, 5 to 10 years. Different countries have different experience with different time periods. It can be a very complicated way, unfortunately, but we are already getting ready to it. We have more questions, please.
This is Sasaki of Kyodo News, Japanese news agency. Thank you for explanation for the strategic importance of this Crimea Peninsula. I also visited there before the annexation and during the referendum. And the biggest problem for Ukraine now is how to get it back. And yesterday and the day before yesterday, President Zelensky declared that we will get Crimea back by any way, without consultation. Now, I'd like to ask to Ms. Tasheva, what does it mean by any means? You mentioned now that military scenario is one of the options. You don't exclude it. And also, by any consultations means that you would not consult with US or European partners before stepping out to that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, really, the attention to the Crimean topic is rising. I can see that our Japanese colleagues are paying a lot of attention to this topic. We are really grateful that the Prime Minister of Japan has addressed the Crimea platform. So the level of the representation in 2022, after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, was really very high level. Though last year it was important as well that Japan joined the Crimean Declaration. You understand that we have same problems. You have northern territories, and it's so important that Japan at the highest level also is speaking about the comeback of these territories. And we understand that Russian Federation, as it is speaking about the territory of the Crimean Peninsula, it is saying the same, that he doesn't want any communications and consultations about your northern territories. So about your question, it seems to me the president of Ukraine did make a very specific signal that we will not violate any provisions of the international law to deoccupy these territories, to bring this territory back, using any means possible. The priority sphere, and the president mentioned that in multiple times, is the policy of diplomatic way to bring back the territory, because we understand that any military actions will lead to huge victims among the civilians. We understand that Russian Federation withdrawing from the territory will use our citizens on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula as the live shield. So they will just, on purpose, they will establish their positions within the cities. They will use any mechanisms for Ukraine not to be able to conduct military counter-offensive on the territory of the Crimea. But on the territory of the Crimea, there are several military objects, not only military bases, but also the centers with equipment, with armament, with ammunition, and lots of servicemen. The Crimea is used as a military base, as a platform for the further offensive and attacks against the territory of Ukraine. We can see it that the southern flank of the attacks of Russian Federation is conducted from the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. That is why, to neutralize the opportunity of the Russian Federation to conduct offensives on the territory, from the territory of the peninsula, we can use for our defense, just for the defense first of all, such measures, such ways to neutralize Russian Federation from that direction. So, of course, I will repeat, political, diplomatic way is the preferable one, but with the opportunity of the use of other mechanisms, including the military ones. As the president said, after the Crimean platform, according to the conclusions of the platform at the press conference, Russia did not choose the politically diplomatic way to give the territory back. The Russian Federation is pushing us to different ways, but we understand that any military actions are losses of people, of the civilians, of the servicemen. So of course the priority sphere is still the politically diplomatic solution of the situation as for deoccupation of the Crimea. Are there any other questions left? I would also like to add a bit. Finally, well, just before the moment of the full-scale aggression, we were always saying that the liberation of the Crimea is possible only and exceptionally in the diplomatic way. Ukraine wanted to take this way as well. Now the rhetoric has changed. And as Tamila said, this is not the choice of Ukraine. This was the choice of Russia. So according to the international law, we have all of the rights, including the military way, to take Crimea back. This is our territory, which is not, this annexation is not acknowledged by anybody. But, of course, besides possible destroyed objects and victims, we also assess the fact that Russia annexed this territory and included it into Russian Federation. So we do understand the risk of the use of tactical nuclear weapons, because for them it will mean that they have formally saying the internally legal so-called reason, according to their doctrine of the use of nuclear weapons, to use it. That is why I think the tactics which we can see now is already the tactics of Ukraine, which we have now from the perspective of the destroying of some military objects on the territory of the Crimea, is already with the use of military force. In this or any other way, we already doing that. And I think it will not only increase and will go on. Military liberation or military element does not definitely mean massive shellings or thousands of tanks. Physically, it's very difficult to implement that. But it also includes sabotage, guerrilla, raids. So I think that it will go on and increase. Thank you, dear colleagues. Are there any other questions left? There are no questions. Yes? Yes, please.
With any other partners?
Unfortunately, I cannot comment anything about consultations because the external and foreign relations is the issue for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Presidential Office. And the President of Ukraine is dealing with that. So I cannot comment upon that. I do apologize. I thank you, dear journalists, for the interest to this topic. I thank our participants of this conversation, that now all of the Ukrainians are feeling this readiness of our state, the state of Ukraine. We are ready to the moment when the peninsula will be deoccupied. We are working on that, and it's very important how we will bring it back. Thank you, dear friends, that you've spent this time with us. Stay with us further on.